Hello, so we will now be talking about iodine. Iodine is a trace mineral that plays a key role in thyroid hormone synthesis. Iodine is found in meat, beans, milk, and seafood. However, a primary source for many individuals for this nutrient is fortified iodized salt. Iodine was originally added to salt in the early 1920s to optimize the intake of this nutrient and reduce the risk of deficiency in the US and worldwide. And this is because iodine deficiency is a significant contributor to preventable mental disabilities and goiter. The deficiency of iodine lowers the production of the thyroid hormones T3 and T4, and this reduces the negative feedback for the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid cascade. Therefore, as a result of a reduction in T3 and T4, the hormones called thyroid releasing hormone, or TRH, and thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, will increase, which overstimulates and enlarges the thyroid gland. There are also certain foods called goitrogens that limit thyroid hormone production and may also increase the risk of goiter.
Iodine is a non-metal which is typically found and also functions in its ionic form called iodide. We can see here different food sources of iodine, including meats, beans, and milk, additionally seafood and some water. The food content of iodine, however, may vary based on the iodine levels in the soil. Additionally, a key source of iodine is iodized salt, with a quarter of a teaspoon containing about 68 micrograms of iodine. We see here characteristics of the digestion, absorption, transport, and storage of iodine. We see that iodine is found bound to organic compounds, primarily amino acids. Therefore, the form of iodine bound to the organic compounds must be digested, freeing the iodine to allow for absorption. We can see that the iodine is going to be absorbed rapidly and completely, particularly the iodide form. So through the process of digestion, we do see the conversion of the different forms of iodine to iodide, which is the form absorbed rapidly and completely. We see that iodine travels as free iodide in the blood, and then from there it is picked up and concentrated in the thyroid gland. So we'll see here this is the process of digestion, absorption, and then movement through the basolateral membrane into the enterocyte. We see that we consume iodine bound to organic compounds, so we see here amino acids, so this will need to be hydrolyzed, freeing the iodine from the amino acid structure, and then we see the free iodide, so this is going to be the iodide form that's going to be absorbed rapidly and completely. Very little of the iodide is actually excreted. So we see the iodine then circulating within the enterocyte, and from there it moves through the basolateral membrane and is present in circulation as free iodide. From circulation, the iodide is transported to the thyroid and is picked up by the thyroid gland and undergoes further metabolism at that tissue site. So we see here the involvement of iodine in the synthesis of thyroid hormones. So the primary thyroid hormones will be called thyroxine, or T4, and the triiodothyronine, or T3. And so these are formed in the thyroid gland, and the formation of these hormones in the thyroid gland is dependent on iodine. We're going to go over a diagram that reviews the formation of the T3 and T4 in the thyroid cell. Once the hormones are synthesized, we see that they are transported by different proteins, so either the thyroxine binding globulin, albumin, or transthyretin. So we're going to see once the T3 and T4 are synthesized, they're going to be transported through the bloodstream via these different proteins. So we see here a diagram that shows the synthesis of the thyroid hormones. So we see the final product here being the T3 and T4, which we mentioned are taken up by these different transport proteins, which allow them to move through circulation. So we see here this is the bloodstream, and then here is the thyroid cell, and then the colloid cell. And so this is where we have the synthesis of the thyroid hormone. We will not review step by step the process of the synthesis of the thyroid hormones, but I do want to highlight the role of iodine here so we could see iodine in the form of iodide. So we see iodide, which was being transported through circulation, then sent to the thyroid cell and is picked up and carried through the cell membrane by this ATPase. So we see the iodine here being picked up and used for the process of the formation of these thyroid hormones. And again, we see once they are formed, we have them carried through circulation by these transport proteins. This will be the main function that we'll discuss as it relates to iodine, is primarily in the function of producing the thyroid hormones. Here's the RDA for iodine. We see for adults it's 150 micrograms per day. In pregnancy and lactation, it's higher at 220 and 290 micrograms per day, and the tolerable upper intake level is 1100 micrograms per day. We will discuss deficiency symptoms of iodine. So the primary deficiency symptom is what is called goiter, and goiter is enlargement of the thyroid gland. So with a deficiency in iodine, it actually will reduce the synthesis of T3 and T4, and with reduction in the synthesis of the thyroid hormones, we have overstimulation of the releasing and stimulating hormones that would ultimately promote the synthesis of the thyroid hormones. So to produce the thyroid hormones, in addition to iodine, there's a cascade of events that initiates in the hypothalamus, which is in the brain. So it starts at the hypothalamus, and then the signal gets transmitted to the pituitary gland, which then sends a signal to the thyroid gland. As thyroid hormone is formed, it actually sends a negative feedback back to the hypothalamus and to the pituitary, telling those body sites to reduce the formation and synthesis of thyroid hormone. But if thyroid hormone is not synthesized at an adequate rate, the signaling from the hypothalamus and from the pituitary will increase. And so we'll go through and outline this process and how, with a low production of thyroid hormones, it leads to eventual production of the goiter. So we can see the process with this diagram here. We can see the hypothalamus, we see the pituitary, and the thyroid gland. And what's nice about this diagram is it also shows the thyroid follicle and a follicular cell, which is where we have the synthesis of the thyroid hormones. But we do see the involvement here of iodide. So we see iodide entering the thyroid follicular cell and a series of events, and then the eventual formation of the T3 and T4, which also shows up here. So from the thyroid, we have the involvement of the iodide, and then the eventual production of the thyroid hormones. So just discussing this cascade of events, from the hypothalamus, we have release what is called thyrotropin releasing hormone. It's a releasing hormone that is sensed by the pituitary, and in response, the pituitary will synthesize and secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. The thyroid gland senses the TSH, and in response, that promotes the synthesis and secretion of T3 and T4. But that is as long as adequate levels of iodine are present to aid in the synthesis of the T3 and T4 thyroid hormones. So as these hormones are produced, this in turn will inhibit the release and additional signaling from the TRH and TSH. So as these hormones are present, then the signal from the hypothalamus will decrease, the signal from the pituitary will also decrease. But we'll now discuss the situation where we have deficient levels of the iodide. So we have inadequate iodine and inadequate iodide for the production of the thyroid hormone. So in that case, we have a deficiency of iodine, that will decrease the production of T3 and T4 because essentially we don't have the tools needed to produce the thyroid hormones. So with lower levels of these thyroid hormones, we have less of the inhibition of the TRH and TSH. And so with less inhibition of the TRH and TSH, the level of these hormones will actually increase. And with increasing TRH, that will further increase TSH, and with further increase of TSH, that will stimulate the thyroid gland. And with that further stimulation of the thyroid gland, we see that leads to an enlarged thyroid. With continual deficiency of iodine and iodide and an inability to produce the thyroid hormone, the thyroid gland will enlarge to a point till it reaches what is called a goiter. So we see here this image of an enlarged thyroid, and this outline here is what would be a normal thyroid gland, and we see how it is enlarged. And we see here that the neck area surrounding the thyroid gland will be bulged, and it will look enlarged and swollen. And this is going to be the image with the chronic deficiency of iodine. It's going to lead to a goiter. So in addition to low levels of iodine, there are actually some interactions with other nutrients that affect the thyroid hormone production and that augment the release of the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. And so these nutrients would be called goitrogens. And these goitrogens, again, interfere with the thyroid hormone production, increasing TSH. This in turn promotes thyroid gland enlargement. And the mechanism is essentially similar as to what we saw with iodine deficiency. As iodine deficiency occurred, we had a lower production of the thyroid hormones. We had then less inhibition of TRH and TSH, and that in turn augmented the release of the thyroid stimulating hormone. So excessive intake of these goitrogens will actually promote thyroid gland enlargement. We can see foods containing these goitrogens include cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, also cassava, kale, broccoli. So a lot of these vegetables will contain high levels of these goitrogens. However, cooking these foods actually limits the interference with the production of the thyroid hormones. So if large intakes of these vegetables would be consumed, it would be beneficial to cook the vegetables to reduce the risk of an enlargement of the thyroid gland. We see here also a condition called cretinism. So cretinism is a condition more significantly affecting the developing infant or child, so with chronic low intake levels and low iodine status during periods of development. Cretinism may occur, which has neurologic effects, so affecting mental and motor development. With severe cases, it can also lead to deafness. Also, we have the hypothyroid cretinism, which could lead to thyroid failure.